And last night, as I was thinking about this message, I was thinking about the fact that we love when people like and comment on our social media. In fact, I was watching this service live, just hoping we could get to the 200 mark. How cool would it be if 200 people are watching? But we all know that we take that perfect photo. Now, for me, every photo is perfect, but we take that photo and then we use filters and we do all this work. Sometimes we'll spend 10, 20, 30 minutes on one photo, and after we post it, that's when it gets fun. Now we get to sit back and wait for the comments and wait for people to like it, because we enjoy that. We want people to like what we're putting out there. It makes us feel important. It makes us feel valued. And it also makes us feel like we have influence. We all want to have influence, and so the world we live in now, social media, is one of the greatest ways that we sometimes can gauge what kind of influence we have. It feels good to know that people like what we're posting, because we want to be heard. We want to say important things to other people, and we obviously do that through a number of different avenues these days. But when people like, comment, and view our stuff, it's called influence. And some people, they're actually called influencers, social media influencers. They're all about getting out there and telling everyone about a product or a place or someone. And people will hire influencers to help influence something they're doing. It's a really big deal now. Last night, in fact, all the pastors in Northwest Arkansas are calling one another. What are you doing for church tomorrow? Are you going to have church? And as soon this morning as one person cancels, everybody else starts canceling, because there's influence. We're waiting for someone else to influence our decision. Nobody wants to cancel, and then, of course, here in Northwest Arkansas, wake up and there not be any snow. But this time there actually was snow, so good job, weathermen. When you're a kid, your parents tell you to stay away from some kids because they are a bad influence. That's right. And if your parents never said that to you, it's because you were the bad influence. So some of you can identify. But I remember my parents were always worried about what kind of music I listened to. They were worried about who I would hang out with, how I was spending my time. And of course, when you're a teenager, that's called annoying. You know, your parents are hovering over you, and you don't like that, but you don't really understand why it's so important. I remember when I was about 16, someone had given me an Adam Sandler comedy CD as a 16-year-old. And if you've ever heard it, I hope you haven't, but if you have, it's not the most Christian album I've ever had before. And someone at school let me borrow it, and I remember playing it in my brand new CD player that I put in my truck, and rocking out to some song or listening to one of his comedy bits. And my dad used my truck one morning, and I remember thinking in my head, oh no, I think that CD is playing right now. So when my dad got back, he went off to do something else, and I ran out to my truck, and I found the CD in about 1 million pieces in the floorboard of the truck. To this day, he's never said a word to me about it. He made it very clear with what he did, how he felt about the Adam Sandler CD, because he cared about my influence. When I was even smaller, I had some friends in a neighborhood, and they influenced me to go around and jump on a trampoline and with BB guns shoot at dogs and cats in other people's yards. It ended up with me being an 8-year-old in the back of a police car. So you can guess what my parents said about the influence that I was hanging around at the time. And so for all of you, influence matters. And here's the thing, our influence is actually limitless. When we think about what kind of influence we have and can have, it's really limitless, because relationships equal influence. So every day, we're mostly building more relationships or building onto the relationships that we have, and it's really limitless how far we can go with that kind of influence. Imagine for a moment, God shows up in your house one day. You're sitting there vacuuming or watching SportsCenter or whatever you're doing at home, and suddenly God begins to speak to you in your home. Now, if you're like me, you probably would run out of the house or go grab a gun or something, not knowing what this voice is. It would terrify you. But if God showed up to you and said, your influence has no limits, and I want to do something in your life, we would probably think one of a few things. Number one, we would probably think, I don't know if I'm up for this. I don't know if I have what it takes to do, God, what you're calling me to do. The second thing we might think is, I don't know if I even want this. I don't know if I'm comfortable with it. I don't know if I can handle it. And the third thing that you might think is, I don't know if I'm even qualified for this. How do I know, God, if I could even be qualified to do what you're calling me to do? Moses was born in a time in Egypt when Pharaoh had decided there were too many Hebrew people. And so you may know the story. He starts killing the newborns, and Moses' mother puts him in a basket and sends him down the river. And unknowingly, Pharaoh's daughter finds him and raises him in an Egyptian royalty home, and he later on in life is out and about, and he sees an Egyptian beating one of his Hebrew brothers, and he ends up killing the Egyptian. Well, now he's gone from living in royalty to running for his life and really becoming a nomad. And later on in the story, we see that God steps in on his life. And before I show you the interaction between God and Moses, I want to take you back to all of the objections to having influence that Moses might have had. I want you to think about the fact that Moses was a murderer on the run. That's a pretty big deal. Hopefully none of you can identify with that right now. He was disliked by the Egyptians for running away and killing one of their own people. He was disliked by his own people because he had made life even worse for them by killing the Egyptian and making Pharaoh even more upset. And now he is a nomad shepherd in literally the middle of nowhere. It doesn't really sound like the perfect person for God to step in on the scene and say, hey, I want to use your influence. And so I know a lot of you may identify with that. Like, how would God use me, and why would God choose to do something in my life? So let's take a look at the conversation in Exodus chapter 3, verse 1. It says, Moses was tending to the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, and the priest of the Midian, and led the flock to their far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it didn't burn up. So Moses thought, I'm going to go over there and see this strange sight and why the bush doesn't burn up. Verse 4 says, when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called him from within the bush and said, Moses, Moses. Now, this is a big deal. Even though he's a nomad, an ex-murderer, God knew exactly where Moses was. He knew where he was physically. He knew where he was spiritually. He knew everything about Moses in this moment. And I want you to know, God knows where you are too. As you're sitting at home right now, watching on a live stream, God knows where you are physically, but he also knows where you are spiritually, where you are mentally. He knows your health. He knows what's going on in your life. He knows the roadblocks that are going on in your life that are keeping you from stepping out and stepping into your destiny, into your calling. God knows exactly what's going on with you, and he hasn't forgot about you. God hasn't given up on you, even though a lot of times we feel that way. A lot of people leave the local church because they've just decided they're disqualified because of their past or mistakes, and God wouldn't want anything to do with them. God only wants to use the elite. But if you really read the Bible, you learn it's really the other way around. God is often looking for the person that is the furthest away, that's the most unqualified, the most unlikely. I say this all the time. God uses those people to make it clear that he is alive and he is present in that person's life. God's not looking for people that have it all together. God's not looking for someone that can go out and do something amazing and people think, well, it's just because they have ability. No, God is looking for someone like me. When I planted this church, that people are blown away and surprised saying, how in the world is this happening? It's got to be God. It's got to be a higher power, and God wants to use that same method, that same thing in your own life today. Let's go on and read Exodus chapter 3, verse 5. God says this, don't come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. Then he said, I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. In verse 7 it says, then the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and bring them up out of the land into the good and spacious land, the land flowing with milk and honey. And I want you to see what it says in verse 10. God says this, so now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. I think the main point on this whole story is simply this. When it comes to our influence, big influence simply starts with a small step. And a lot of times we see this promise or we see this thing that we believe maybe God has called us to at one time, or maybe we feel like maybe one day in life I can be there if I can get my life together. So we put all of these parameters in place and put all these roadblocks in place. When really today, God, all He's asking is for you just to take a step. We don't always get where we're wanting to go with one giant leap. It's typically small steps along the way. And for some of us, it feels like 3 steps forward and 4 steps back and 2 steps forward. And it sometimes feels like we're not going anywhere. But I promise you, God is calling you today just to keep taking a step forward. Keep believing, keep having the faith that's necessary, and know that He hasn't forgot about you, that He is with you and He is for you. So what step is in front of you right now? As you're watching at home, I want you to think about it. What is the small step that you need to take? I love that Soco Church is set up in a way that people can take small steps. We have our Soco Leadership Academy, where we're teaching people really the basics of the Bible, and we're also teaching leadership. And we weren't really sure how many people would even sign up, and we ended up filling it up with 50 people in this first semester. Our next class, sometimes we have up to 40 people that come to that class. We've had even more than that, I believe, at times. When we have baptisms, people sign up. At the end of services, people raise their hand and say yes to Jesus. People getting in groups in crazy numbers in our community groups. There's always a next step for you at Soco. And so I would ask you, what is the step that you need to take? What relationship is in front of you right now that God has placed there that maybe we haven't been stewarding that relationship the right way? Maybe God is calling you to do something in that person's life by being an example, a friend, being a prayer warrior for that person. What is the small step that you need to take? What's the opportunity in front of you right now? Every opportunity is going to be met with an excuse. I want you to hear that. Every opportunity you're ever going to have is going to be met with an excuse. There's always a reason. Not right now. Not right now. Now's not the time. Maybe next week. Maybe next year. I know for my wife and I, when we felt the call to plant this church, I wanted to put it off for weeks and then months and then years. I just never felt ready. Let me tell you something that maybe could change everything for you. When God has a plan for your life, and He does, when God is calling you to something, and He is and He will, you are never ready. You are absolutely never going to step into something ready. So I want to encourage you today to start taking a step, knowing that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not have your life together. It's okay to not be ready as you think you should be. Take a step today, because life is short. Life is really short. In fact, I want to just show you an illustration on the screen here in just a moment. But on average, we get 80 years in this life. And I want you to look at the average person's 80 years, how we spend it. 71 are spent sleeping, eating, working, technology, video games, and so on. 71 of our 80 years are in those categories. Some of you, it's even more because you sleep way too much, right? 71 of our 80 years, that leaves us with 9 years of our 80 to have some time to do whatever we want to do. And for many of us, we spend that time saying, I'm not ready to do what you've called me to do, God. I'm not ready to take a step. I'm not qualified. I'm not prepared. So I'm going to do other things in life. This short life that we have, and listen, I know some of you are watching very young and some of you are very old. And here's the amazing thing about God. It doesn't matter how young or old you are, God still has a plan for your life. And today you can take a next step. today. You don't have to look back on your life and think, I'm too old, if I just would have started years ago. Nope, you can start right now. And some of you are too young, maybe. You're thinking, maybe when I'm 25 or I'm 30 or I have a full-time job. No, you can start right now as well. So as we close, let me ask you this. Maybe your first step or your next step is to learn how to just invite someone to come to church. Learning how to just invest in someone and tell them your story. And let me tell you this, when it comes to inviting people to church, when it comes to telling people where you go, you don't have to tell them the whole Bible. In fact, there's going to be times when they ask you questions and your answer just simply needs to be, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how it all works, but I know that for me, this is where I was and this is where I am. This is how God has transformed my life. People want your story way more than they want some Bible lesson first. So share your story. There's people you work with. There's people that you know, people in your own family that are waiting for you to invest in them and to love on them. Maybe that's your next step. Maybe it's leading someone to your workplace instead of just avoiding everybody. Maybe God has put some people in front of you that you need to steward their souls. You need to love on them. Maybe your next step is sharing your story, like I said, with a friend. Here's a challenging one for you. Maybe it's getting in a community group. We believe in that so much here. And I've seen the fruit of that. Our own youth pastor, Dupree, that moved up here from San Antonio, he's a product of a community group. Being in a group with me and some of the other guys. And now he's stepping into ministry. And he's here today because he took a small step. And I'm sure he was a little concerned. I don't really know anybody. I don't know if this is going to be fun. And now here he is because he took a step. Some of you have an excuse right now. I don't have time. I don't know anyone. I don't know if there's a group that's great for me. Can I just tell you, take a step today. They should be posting a link online right now that you can actually go click on, look at our groups, and sign up for a group right now. It's that easy. Maybe your next step today is coming to next weekend. We were supposed to have it today, but it's going to be next Sunday during our 11:30 service. Maybe you've been coming for a while or even for a short time, and you've just been kind of watching and waiting. Listen, come to Next, and let me tell you what happens. We tell you all about the church, and we give you an opportunity to plug in. No obligation. We just give you the opportunity. Maybe that's your next. Get on a team. See how God will use you and bless you by being more like Jesus than any other way when we serve others. And lastly, maybe your next step is just to start giving at Soco. Maybe you believe in the mission and vision and you haven't plugged in financially yet. I want to encourage you to do that. I want to encourage you to be a part. Don't be on the sideline. Be a part of this. Life is too short for us to just watch everything happen from the sideline. Listen, let's start today leaving a legacy that really matters. A legacy for our family, a legacy for our friends, a legacy, like I said earlier, for people that we can take to heaven with us, because all this other stuff has to stay behind. So let's begin that today. The greatest obstacle is going to be the excuses that you face. And I hope you feel encouraged today, and I hope that you will go get in a group, sign up for Next. I believe they're posting the link for that as well, where you can get registered. But let me tell you this, Moses had a glaring past, but God invited him to be a part of a greater story. I had a glaring past, and God invited me to be a part of an unbelievable story, and it's called Soco. And I believe He's invited you to as well, but He's not done. He's not just asking you to show up. He's asking you to take a next step. We should all be taking a next step. So maybe you're like Moses and you have no idea what God may have in store for you. So take that small step today and trust that He will catch you on the move, because big influence starts with a small step. I want to look in the camera and just tell every one of you, you're an influencer. You're an influencer. It's up to you on how you're going to influence and what you're going to influence people to. And I pray today that you'll begin to influence people towards a relationship with Jesus, because in the end, that's the only relationship that matters.